is actually sufficient to prove persistent violations of the United States, of the principles of the UN Charter, just by talking about their violations against their own people, particularly against their so-called minority communities, so-called minority Americans, whom they don't even regard as Americans. If your ancestors come from Africa, or your ancestors come from so-called Latin America, or your ancestors come from Asia, if your ancestors come from India or Pakistan or the Arab world or wherever else, if that's where your ancestors came from, if you're a second, third, fourth, whatever generation citizen, but your ancestors came from a country from the global south and not from Europe, well, they don't look at you as an American. They look at you the same way that they would look at you if you're walking in the streets of Gaza. They see you the same way when you're walking in the streets of Chicago. And if they look at you a certain kind of way if you're walking in the streets of Mogadishu, and they look at you the same way if you're walking in the streets of Minnesota or Minneapolis. If you're walking in the streets of Mexico City, well, they see you the same way when they see you walking in California. And they'll treat you the same way. The same way that America treats the countries of the global south is the same way that they treat the people who come from the global south who live in the United States. They see you as a people who are eligible for violence and brutalization and domination and extrajudicial killing and incarceration, detention, and slave labor. That's how they see you. And yes, we all know that. But I'm telling you, it's not just wrong. It's not just outrageous. It's not just something to get angry about. These are crimes. These are international crimes. When an extrajudicial killing is carried out against a member of the so-called black community, of the African-American community, or any minority community in the United States, so-called minority, when any of those extrajudicial killings are carried out by security forces, I'm telling you, the proper protocol shouldn't be that one police officer gets to be tried by a jury of his peers in some local court that's under the hands of the same system that gave that police officer a gun in the first place and gave him his marching orders in the first place. He should be, him, the police chief, the police commissioner, the mayor, the city council, all of them should be brought before the Hague. A case should be made of targeted extrajudicial killing, ethnic cleansing should be brought before the International Criminal Court. Because these are violations of the UN Charter, these are violations of international law, but they don't want you to think about that, they don't want you to know that. All they want you to do is maybe get mad about it and go out in the streets and protest about it and whatever, but not ever do anything substantive. Don't ever do anything that has any real impact, that has any real consequence. They've already engineered the system in such a way that the one organization, the one institution that you could go to get your justice is the United Nations, and they've got that in their pocket. So the only way that we can resolve this problem, even for the American citizens themselves, so that they themselves can get some kind of justice, is to expel America from the United Nations, so that the United Nations, again, can be liberated from that domination and actually do its job. With regards to dissolving the United Nations, I think that it can be aptly compared to a slave plantation, and someone who thinks that the problem on a slave plantation is the plantation itself and not the slavery, and not the slave master. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with the plantation. You grow beautiful vegetables, you grow beautiful crops that can feed the whole village, that can feed the whole town. If you get rid of the slave master, you still have the crops. And they're still useful, and you can still farm them, you can still cultivate them, and you can still feed the people. The problem is not the plantation itself. The problem is the slave master, and the problem is the slavery. So once you get rid of the slave master, then that plantation becomes a beautiful thing. And that's exactly what would happen with the United Nations, inshallah. Again, it's similar to an earlier comment saying that, yeah, we know what the government is doing. We're aware of that. Okay, then why was there Black Lives Matter protests? Why did that even happen? You have recourse. You're supposed to have recourse to international law. But they've set up a system to where you're supposed to be a democracy, right? It's supposed to be a democracy. So when your rights are being violated, aren't you supposed to have some democratic mechanisms? Aren't you supposed to have some democratic channels for the recourse and the redress of your grievances? Why does anyone in America, in a so-called democracy, ever have to go out in the street and protest? You're supposed to have mechanisms. You're supposed to have a representative government. You're supposed to have channels to have your grievances redressed. But everyone in America knows that they can't. Everyone knows that the ones who are violating their rights are exactly the same ones that they're expected to go to for the redress of their grievances. To get your grievances redressed, you have to go to the ones who are causing the grievance. That's the way that they've set up that system. So then the people feel that they have nowhere else to turn. They have nothing else to do, so they go out into the streets and protest. And America doesn't mind when you go out and protest because you're just letting off steam. What they don't want you to do is something useful where your grievances can actually be redressed, where you can actually go to an institution of justice. That's what they don't want you to do. They don't mind if you go out in the streets. They don't even mind if you burn down a police station. They don't care. That's just letting off steam so that they can continue to do what they've always done, because they have you convinced that there's nothing you can do about it except just get angry and break things. They don't mind that. But what you can do is get the United States expelled from the United Nations, and then you can take your own country to the United Nations, to the ICC, to the ICJ for these types of crimes. And it's not even just the most dramatic instances of violations, like the extrajudicial killings by the police, like mass incarceration. These are very drastic, severe, dramatic examples. But your rights are violated in ways that you don't even know they're violations of your rights, because you don't even know that international law gives you those rights. You don't know what the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights says. You don't know what the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights guarantees to you under international law. You're not supposed to be able to be criminalized for losing your home, for being out on the street. Why, they made that criminal in the United States. They criminalized being homeless, but they didn't criminalize making it unaffordable to have a home. They didn't make it criminal for you to not be able to even make enough money to make ends meet to where you lost your home. That's not criminal. But being criminal is being a victim of that very system that is victimizing you. They've turned you into a victim, and then they criminalize being a victim. And there's not anything you can do about it according to your own system. But you're supposed to be able to have recourse to international law. You're not even supposed to, the mass surveillance that you're under over there. Your every move is being watched. They listen to you all the time, and you've noticed it. You know that when you look up something on Google or you look up something on Facebook, then all of a sudden you get nothing but ads about this, that, or the other. Or even if you're having a private conversation with someone, suddenly you start to see ads and advertisements and offers and this and that from things that you were talking about with your friend. They're listening to you the whole time. Well, I have news for you. They're not allowed to do that under international law. They're not allowed to mass surveillance you. They're not allowed to collect your data. That's not allowed under international law. You can bring them to the United Nations for that. But again, like I said before, you can't do that as long as America controls the United Nations. The only way you can do that is to free the United Nations from American domination, so that then potentially the United Nations can solve your problem for you and can hold your country accountable and can hold that tyrannical, dystopian, pretend democratic government accountable for its violations against you that they're committing on a daily basis.